Is that the magic red button? Okay. Well, formally, good morning, everyone. Great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces. Some of you are from North Fargo, some of you from throughout Fargo, and even more from around the greater part of the state. So good to be able to have a conversation this morning. I'm Josh Boucher, serve in District 44 since 2012, and currently serve as the House Minority Leader. I'm actually up in Minot, North Dakota. I had my grandma's funeral yesterday, so still being able to participate remotely is a good thing. So as Meryl was saying earlier, I think we're learning how to implement technology in a variety of different ways to increase access. And, I think that's one of the biggest things about this session is how technology has, made the legislative process a lot more accessible. There had been pushes for years to live stream committee rooms, and there was some hesitancy to do that by some folks, primarily because it was a significant cost. So the idea was that we would do kind of 2 committee rooms every year and grow into it. And so the plan for this year was that the appropriation committees for both the Senate and the House were going to have live streaming technology in their rooms. Fast forward to the pandemic, and fortunately being able to use some of the CARES Act funding, the entire Legislative Assembly was brought up to speed in about 4 short months. We have a great team of legislative IT people. I think there's only 4 of them total. There might be a 5th or 6th person that we don't see, but they stood that up along with the online submission process, along with the video on demand process. So really moved mountains to make sure that North Dakotans and us legislators are able to participate in the session. We get a weekly report from legislative IT, and there's hundreds of people watching certain committee meetings. So we're able to get a report for every bill, how many people are watching it live, and then they also have a report of how many people watched it some other later time before they ran that report. And it was the North Dakota University System budget in the Senate Appropriations Committee won the Nielsen Awards, or Nielsen's Ratings Awards. I think they had about 700 people, they said, were watching that throughout the day. So certainly great. And what that's led to is super quiet Capitol. I was not expecting it to be that quiet. I knew that there would be less people around, and we aren't allowing people to sit with us on the floor. There aren't associations doing socials in the evening or promotional things going on in the Great Hall. I still thought a lot of people would show up to the Capitol, but what we're finding is, committee hearings are going pretty well with a few bumps here and there, but people are able to do in-person testimony as well as virtual. And, I know Carla and Meryl can talk a little bit more because they serve on committees, but what's nice about that system, and for you as North Dakotans, is that as testimony is being submitted, you can go read that testimony almost immediately. The videos are instantaneous. In previous sessions, it would take, a legislator would have to contact our legislative librarian. That individual would then run a report and try to get us all the testimony and the transcription. That might take a couple days to write up. So it could be 3-4 days before we got materials from what happened in a committee meeting. Now it's instantaneous. So again, increasing access. As far as, within leadership, I said Carla and Meryl will talk about committees. I don't serve on any policy committees. I work with the 3 other leaders, and then the governor's office to try to keep what I consider the big rocks moving forward. And I think that's, again, one of the testaments of regardless of Democrat, Republican, far right, far left, somewhere in the middle, is us 4 legislative leaders have worked well. We worked through last session well, ended the session on a good note. Then all of a sudden have the pandemic to deal with, and some of the governor's decisions unified us again against party lines between the House and the Senate, where sometimes there's friction, to make sure that we're doing our legislative responsibilities specifically around appropriations. So the 4 of us are coming into the session with a good amount of trust, understanding where each other stands, and some of the big rocks that we're looking to move forward, which you've seen a lot of us communicate about, is trying to figure out some form of bonding is a financial tool to specifically address infrastructure needs. The debate is less going to be about whether we do bonding and much more about which types of projects and that dollar amount. So there's 3 proposals that are out there. The Democrats have a proposal, the Republicans have a proposal, and the governor has a proposal. So that will, and those bills were heard last week. One was heard in the Senate, and then the House, they'll be heard on Monday, along with some ideas about how to prioritize legacy fund earnings. And again, there's basically 2 proposals. There's the Democrat plan and the Republican plan, both of which have a ton of similarities and kind of using big buckets of, a bucket for economic diversification, a bucket for addressing some education needs, a bucket to pay back the infrastructure bonds, and then they vary based on some other priorities that the 2 caucuses have. And then a number of legislators have also introduced their own ideas. There is, I believe it's a $25 million or $50 million proposal for value-added agriculture diversification coming out of a lot of the legislators from the Jamestown area. There is the folks out of Coal Country have a proposal in terms of what they're calling sustainable renewable authority, and Meryl can certainly talk much more about that, serving on energy and natural resources. But so yeah, a lot of big ideas. These first few weeks, you all are seeing the headlines. We call this first month kind of the headline month. The reporters are running around. They hear about what someone might consider a crazy bill over here and over there. But those headlines will start to narrow down to much more focus on the budget, public employee salaries, education funding, human services, and figuring out where we go through February before we pass bills from one chamber to the next. So thanks for joining us. Carla, take it away.
Well, guys, everyone, thank you for being here, taking part of your Saturday morning to hear some updates from us. Yeah, it seems like it's been a whirlwind of a month. For January, we have a lot of bills. Our caucus has been really trying to advance a lot of good legislation. Like Josh said, we have some major rocks that we want to see move forward, whether that be K through 12 education, higher ed, healthcare, making that more affordable and more transparent, making sure Medicaid expansion passes, and then things around infrastructure, and as a result, property taxes. There's some efforts related to bonding to make that, to really take advantage of our the lower priced financing, and as a result, hopefully take some burden off of our local property taxes. At the same time, we have some other good bills that we're pushing forward. We have a member of our caucus who has a bill related to making sure our K through 12 kids have food during the day at school. So free lunch, free breakfast. And so that was heard this week. I have a bill next week that's being heard that would create a paid family leave program for North Dakota families. It's an optional program that would help people if they have a new child in their family or have to take care of either themselves or a loved one. There's also bills related to helping the small businesses that are suffering because of the pandemic. Representative Anderson has one that will help the very small businesses in our state with their cash flow problems that have resulted during the pandemic. At the same time, we're also monitoring and trying to either kill or fix some of the bad bills that we're seeing in the legislature. And I would say that's equally as important. We don't want to see the bad legislation get any traction. If you have subscribed to our email updates that we send once a week, you might have noticed that we've talked about some of these pieces of bad legislation. There's a whole package. There's actually like 44 bills related to election laws. And some of these are really negative, would have some really negative effects to voters in North Dakota. They would restrict your ability to vote, either because of limiting absentee voting or early voting or our residency requirements. And so we're really watching those carefully, and we're hoping that those don't advance. There's also a number of bills related to firearms, allowing firearms in public places. There's a couple of those. There's another stand your ground bill, which is very dangerous because our current self-defense laws are adequate, and this would really expand that in a dangerous way. And there's also some bills related to limiting our political subdivisions, like cities and counties, limiting their authority. So it's really limiting local control and local decision making. And so we're keeping an eye on those and hoping to either kill them or fix them as much as we can. So why don't I turn it over to Meryl, and then we're getting some questions in the chat, which is awesome. Keep doing that if you want. And then we'll start taking some questions after Meryl gives his update.
Very good. Thank you, Carla. And of course, the funnest part really is our question and answer period during these forums. So we'll get to that shortly. But again, it is certainly an honor and a privilege to be representing District 44. And I always have to remind myself and others too, that not only do we represent our district, but we, in Cass County, the city of Fargo, but also North Dakota and some of these more broad-ranging issues. I serve on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee and also Tax and Finance. That's a new committee for me. And so we each kind of deal with different issues on a daily basis. That's why we have to keep in close contact with each other and rely on each other for information. I think, how many bills do you have in the House now, Carla? 500 plus, nearing 600 bills perhaps that you're already are in the hopper. And so that's a lot of information to try to keep track of, that we have to lean on each other for that information. And I think, you know, Carla alluded to this early on, you know, I think there are twice as many people in the House as there are in the Senate. So you have twice as many ideas. And I think you get more of the radical ideas coming from both sides. And those are the ones, or if not radical, maybe out of the mainstream, things that they just aren't budget issues. You know, a lot of the business we take care of is just running the state and making sure that we can move forward. But then everybody brings in their own ideas, and those are the ones that the press gloms onto right away, the sensational ones, and then those are the ones sometimes that the national press grabs a hold of, and that really doesn't represent a lot of the work that we have to do. But like Carla said, you know, no matter what your point of view, I think a lot of time is spent on preventing bad bills from moving forward, and in addition to trying to further your own. So again, my particular interest is energy, where the you know, the Department of Mineral Resources is both the regulator and the promoter of the fossil fuels industry, and it seems like they're caught in the middle sometimes, and it's tough deliberating in that committee sometimes, because, you know, we are so dependent on oil in particular, and coal also, you know, for the income in our state. So when you're weighing environmental concerns against you know, income for the state, is heavy on my mind sometimes. But we also have to remember we just do the best we can, make our decisions according to our heart and our conscience, and of course the advice from the people that we lean on for advice. And a lot of times that is you, our constituents, who certainly do in your opinions and thoughts often. And personally, I know we all do. We all appreciate that. So we just do the best we can, and I think we do a pretty good job with that as well. I personally am introducing 3 bills this week, and I think they're all really good people bills. One involves the status of temporary workers, state temporary workers. Sometimes there are temporary full-time workers who have been working for years in the state, and this is legislation to help move those temporary workers to a permanent position, thereby earning the. And another one is an issue called net metering. This is where someone can have their own power plant, usually maybe by solar panels, and they can create their own energy that they'll use for their home. And if they have extra energy that they create, they're able to put that back into the grid and get credit for that from their power company. And that's a very, very touchy issue with the co-ops and other power providers. So that'll be an interesting bill. And my third one, working with one of our guests here today, Shelley Lenz, who is introducing the Healthy Soils Act. I'm proud to sponsor that bill. We'll be introducing that to the Ag Committee on Thursday. This is it sounds like a rural bill, but it's not. What I like about this bill is that it's co-sponsored by Republicans and Democrats from the West and from the East. And it's what we call common ground. And this is what we really have to strive for. Of course, there's that imbalance in the legislature now, 40 Republican senators, 7 Democrat senators, but we still are important to each other. And we need to reach out and we need to find places where we can work together. And that place is common ground. I believe there's a lot of common ground in this bill, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. It'll help ranchers and farmers and gardeners and people with community gardens, in the big cities. So I'm pretty excited about those. And the technology, just a couple of quick words about that. Legis.nd.gov, and I'm sure Carl, maybe we can put that in the chat room too. That's the website to go to look in on any committee meeting, any floor session. I love the transparency. Everything is videoed and available instantly. legis.nd.gov. That's the homepage for the legislature. There are big buttons there that allow you to view whatever you want to view and also submit a written and oral testimony. So, that's really a benefit of me personally. My wife, Connie, whom several of you know, had some pretty serious oral surgery on a Thursday a couple of weeks ago. And it just dawned on me that, I can leave here being capital at the time, on Wednesday night, meet some kind of testy weather that may have been coming in overnight and such, and be home and tend to her and kind of nurse her along a little bit during her recovery from this surgery. But also, I was able to attend all of my committee meetings and 2 floor sessions and put in all of my votes from home. I want to do that all the time, but it was nice to be able to. It's like paid family leave without leaving, But being able to be here and participate remotely was important. I hope that you folks all take advantage of at least peeking in on it, watching, seeing how people behave and how it works in these committees and on the floor as well. Oh yeah, that's enough for me, and we can move on. So again, thanks for the opportunity, and I think we're as a party in a legislature, we're getting some.
Thank you, Merrill. Let's move into Q&A, and Josh, I'm going to ask you to do the first question. We have 2 questions in the chat related to the redistricting process. So we have a question about the timing, like when do legislators work on the redistricting process, which is done every 10 years after the census? And what is the status of the effort to remove the process from the public eye? Like to what level is the process transparent to people? So Josh, if you could.
Yeah. Good questions, and certainly going to be a major topic, not only in North Dakota, but across the country as we go into our 10-year redistricting process, not only for state legislatures, but also U.S. Congress. What makes North Dakota unique, like other states that have a congressperson at large, since we only have one congressperson, there isn't redistricting for that individual, but then the focus is on the state legislature. So well, let me tell you first, there's 2 bills that have been introduced, one in the Senate by Senator Joan Heckman, and that would be to create an independent redistricting commission. The way she has that set up is the governor, the secretary of state, and one other individual the attorney general make an appointment to the committee, and then each legislative leader, the 4 of us, make 3 recommendations each. And then those 3 that were selected by the executive branch would then, based on consensus, pick the remaining seats. So similar to how the Ethics Commission was created. And the idea there is that, we as legislators then aren't involved with the process and aren't essentially picking our voters. The other bill that's been introduced by Representative Chet Pollert on the House side is, I'll call the standard bill. It's the bill that lays out the process that we've done every 10 years for the past few years. And what that process looks like there is we, as this legislature right now, will be done by the end of April. So if we pass this bill, which we should, there's no reason we shouldn't, it would create a committee of 16 legislators, 8 from the Senate, 8 from the House, and then based on proportionality, the party makeup. So based on current proportionality, that would be 7 Republicans and 1 Democrat from each chamber. And that committee then would spend June through October doing the redistricting process. We would get the data from the U.S. Census and then start plugging it in to see how population changes have happened in the state. The general assumption is, so right now each legislative district has approximately 14,500 people. The general assumption based on where we think population is going to be, this isn't anything firm, is that districts would grow to approximately 16,000 people per district. So when you think about our district in 44, we're 32nd Avenue North down to 5th Avenue North, University Drive to the river, then it kind of doglegs up behind Hornbachers and up there to 32nd. You know, we didn't necessarily have growth in our, there wasn't a whole lot of new buildings or new homes. So to get those 16, you know, that additional 1,500 people, our lines have to grow, and we have the river on the one side. So we're going to go, you know, maybe on the campus, maybe up north, maybe down south, maybe they'll shift us all the way one down. So that's what this committee does. And reading through the minutes from the committee work 10 years ago, which you could go do looking at the 2011 session, and I'm happy to find those links if you're interested for you. They met 7 times, I believe, between June and October. And in those committees, many of the committee meetings were a day and a half, and some were just a day. But the legislators from different regions of the state would get together and kind of make some proposals on, you know, for Bismarck area legislators, what would their suggestions be? Because one of the important things about redistricting, and in which this bill says, and it's, you know, a best practice, is that districts are contiguous and as compact as possible. That we're not doing crazy things like you might see on the news with congressional districts where, you know, it's basically a barbell or a dumbbell, excuse me, you know, where there's 6 blocks that connect 2 miles worth of a district. And we're fortunate in North Dakota, and a lot of that just has to do with our population density, that most of our districts look kind of like some sort of form of a square, and try to keep as many counties whole as possible. But with that growth, the anticipation is that Cass County and Burleigh or Morton County would get a new district each. And that would mean then the center of the state, where we've seen some population decrease, especially north of I-94, and then up in the northeast corner of the state, potentially those districts may be losing a district, and then we move those maps around. So one of the questions was about the transparency of the committee, and section 4 of that bill, I think has a lot of people concerned, and I did some researching, because what that section 4 of the bill says, or subsection 4, is that legislators on the committee and legislative council, our records would be exempt records. And so a lot of people are thinking that means that we're going to be doing work in secret. And in visiting with our legislative attorney, it's the same process that was used in 2011. And it's the same level of protection Carla, Merrill, I, and every other legislator has with legislative counsel, which means that while I'm working on something, so if I'm working on a proposal with a staff member in legislative counsel, that is protected information. So an open records request can't be made for it. It does not mean that the committee's work is private. So the committee will not be meeting in private. There is no executive session we go into to play with the lines and then surprise everyone in the 11th hour what those lines are. The public will have access to that again through live streaming. And then in 2011, most of the committee hearings took place in Bismarck, 1 took place in Fargo, and 1 took place up in Devils Lake, so they could visit with some of the tribal communities. So there is an effort. I think there could be much more effort to get around the state and get more input from the counties and cities and folks, especially in rural North Dakota. If any of you are familiar with District 39 in the southwest corner of the state, it goes from the Montana-South Dakota border almost all the way over to the Missouri River, about halfway down, goes all the way up to Watford City. So our legislative colleagues there have, I think it's 7 counties, and it's extremely rural. So the idea of being able to get from one place to the other, even on a weekend, is challenging. And you know, that district's likely going to get even larger. We'll see how it gets divvied up and so forth. So, so I did a little bit of editorializing as well as the facts, but are there any quick follow-up questions to that?
Hi, this is Carol Sawicki from North Dakota Voters First, which is, you know, redistricting reform is our baby.
Okay.
One thing that maybe you guys don't know right now is that the census won't be the census data won't be finalized till, they say, late July at the earliest. So that's going to make everything more compacted or slower or confused. But that's just a fact. I think I understand what you're saying, Josh, about what that thing about secrecy means, or, you know, but the way it's written, it sounds like it could be misused or misinterpreted. And I think that, you know, not saying that every map and every discussion has to be open, but it should be more clear in that portion of the bill, what is available and what is not. Because, go ahead.
I was saying the difference of when talking to legislative attorney is the word exempt record versus a confidential record.
Uh-huh.
A confidential record, if I were to share a confidential record, which means Carla's working on something, she showed it to me and I showed it to someone else without her permission, that's a $1,500 fine to me or the state employee that does that. An exempt record is, there is no fine. It's basically anyone can share it once it's shared. So it is a different level of, it's just so, it's same as, again, when we're working on our bills right now,
Sure.
I don't want other legislators maybe knowing what I'm working on. And so
Sure.
legislative council can't share that.
It's just a matter of making it clear to the people.
Yeah.
That they are, because if somebody from Minot wants to make input or do input on the Minot way the districts are created, first off, they have to have a ability to see what you guys are looking at. You know, is a line go down 3rd Street or 4th Street? You know, and unless they know where to look and unless they know who to ask, they'll never find that out. And I don't know how, that's where, you know, I can understand exactly what you're talking about between exempt and confidential and so forth, and that you need to have some things that you can work on without being poked at every second. But still, the people need to understand that redistricting is really important and affects how the legislature works. And you get this feeling, though it may not be true, that some lines are drawn for incumbent protection or for incumbent, what's the word I want? You know, to punish an incumbent. And somebody's got to be discussing that somewhere, but we never know about it until suddenly the lines appear. Yeah. If anybody in this group is interested in working with North Dakota Voters First, just, you know, I can put my email or our email into the chat box, because that is specifically our focus.
Great, thanks, Carol.
Thanks, Carol.
One thing I forgot about the process, though, is, you know, I said the committee would meet from June to October. Then they take the final plan, or a couple plans they could say they'd make it to the Legislative Assembly, and the governor has to call us in for a special session in November for us to approve that plan or not. So that'd be the final steps. Carla?
That was an awesome discussion. Another set of questions have to do with the budget. So I'm wondering if we can transition from redistricting to budget. And Josh, you've been kind of monitoring some of this, so I'm gonna ask you to answer this one again too. But so in general, there's a lot of people who might be concerned with the overall budget being a little bit tighter this year for the upcoming 2-year biennium. Some of the big rocks that we're keeping our eye on are obviously K through 12 funding, higher ed, and then infrastructure and the bonding proposals that are in place. Another big rock is healthcare. So there's a comment in our chat related to Medicaid expansion and whether or not North Dakota approves that again. But there's some fine details about what the reimbursement rates might look like for the upcoming biennium that could have a dramatic impact, especially on our rural hospitals. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little broadly about what you're seeing in terms of the budget for the upcoming biennium and what you think might happen with some of those big rocks.
Yeah, so the way the budget process works, and since we're transitioning to February, we're going to start seeing budgets really dominoes start falling. So we get a lot of answers as far as what numbers are we looking at. So it's based on forecasts, and it's challenging, a 2-year budget cycle, especially with some volatile economic impacts, not just the pandemic, but energy and agriculture commodities impacted by trade and consumer behavior, and all those impacting sales tax. So a lot of variables that we try to throw the dart at the dartboard and figure out where it is. So one of the big things that has to be decided is if and how much we would be giving raises for state employees, because that impacts every state budget. That decision will likely be made this week by the appropriation committees in the House and Senate. They come to some sort of agreement. Then nursing home support and independent care providers. There are some state money that we help with salaries of the direct care staff. So that has to fall in place. And then K-12 education, the number we are going to essentially set for per pupil payment based on projections. So those are the 3 big rocks for the Appropriations Committee. In the next probably 5 to 7 days, those decisions will be made by the Appropriation Committees, and then that plugs into all the budgets. And that's where then the Senate and the House Committee will start looking more at what numbers do they have or what they think they have available. We were fortunate, the most recent forecast that came out a couple of weeks ago from I'll call them a vendor, the economists that we work with from the legislative standpoint, showed that actually there's likely to be a larger reserve at the end of our 2021 budget. So that gives us a little bit of wiggle room. Right now, if that assumption is correct, we will end the year or the 2-year budget cycle with a $500 million reserve that then transfers over into the next year, and we can use that to help offset some of the other economic impacts we're seeing. It was already determined the price of oil and the number of barrels that we will use for our formulas, and that filters into a couple different other ways of decision making. So all in all, it is healthier than we expected. We think that our economy has certainly been healthier than many other states are facing. But our hope is with that people continue to remain healthy, especially in this kind of the last stretch of the pandemic as people are getting vaccinated. But that's being balanced with, we know that there's new strains and whether or not the vaccine will help or not help with some of those. So, continue to encourage folks to do what they can with masking up, social distancing, support local businesses, but don't spend a lot of time in big crowds in those places. If we can get through getting more people vaccinated in the next few months, that will certainly help our economy going forward. So.
Let me add just a quick comment to Josh's comment about vaccinations. When we come into the Capitol every day, we screen our temperatures and are asked 3 questions about our health. And then 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we are offered rapid testing. Personally, I go in on Monday morning when I come back from the weekend, and then Friday before I leave for home, and have turned out negative each time. But that's a nice service provided to anyone who comes into the Capitol by the health department, public health, and still do have masking requirements at least while in session in floor session at the Capitol. So just I'd
Great. I got an email question about potential voting laws. Is anything broken that these are dealing with? And the answer to that is really no. You know, I think in the last maybe 20 years, there's been 3 cases of voter identity, voter fraud, that kind of thing. So it's extraordinarily rare that we have problems in North Dakota. There's a really good article in the Fargo Forum today about this set of election-related bills and the concerns that even the Republican Secretary of State have, and all the county auditors across the whole state. They feel like our current system is working really well. A large number of counties in North Dakota actually use absentee voting or vote by mail all the time. It wasn't instituted just for the pandemic. They've always used it because of the rural nature of their counties. And so there's great concern by a lot of the people who are involved in running our elections every year that these election-related bills are not needed. They go too far and would create more problems than they're really meant to solve. So, so that was one of the questions we got on email. Any other questions in the chat, or does anyone want to unmute and ask a question?
I'm going to add a little bit. This is Merrill again. I'm going to add a little bit about the election bills that have been put forth. I was able to talk to Secretary of State Al Jaeger a couple of times, and thought he really did a good job publicly during the election, defending the integrity of North Dakota elections and the history of mail-in voting. It's been going on for a long time, and did a good job defending our system all the way to the end. And I think these, most of these laws, by far, most of them that are coming in to restrict voting are going to fall by the wayside and be defeated.
Josh, a follow-up to the comments you made on the budget. I apologize if you touched on it. Did you talk about the Medicaid reimbursement level at all? Is that something that you have insight into?
It's an ongoing conversation from last session. And so for those of you unfamiliar, North Dakota was one of the first states as part of the Affordable Care Act that did Medicaid expansion. And I'll definitely depend on my good friend, Ev Quigley, to correct me if I say anything wrong, but the expansion, what it did was open up more people who didn't qualify for regular Medicaid for healthcare coverage, especially for those that couldn't afford healthcare premiums either on the independent market. A lot of times that is single young workers or many times single parents with kids is kind of the audience. And then folks who show up in the ER who don't have health insurance and they qualify and they kind of get registered right there. So that adds a lot of expense to the program, and especially we saw that for Western area hospitals during the oil boom, because there was an increase in traffic accidents with bigger vehicles that created more harm and injury to people. So it's just this interesting impact of how it all worked out. So the discussion right now is North Dakota contributes about $16 million a biennium to pay for the state's portion of Medicaid expansion. That's 10% of the cost. 90% of the cost is covered by the federal government. So for every dollar we put in, we get $9 back from the federal government. And that is paid then to the provider, to the doctor, the nurse practitioner, the lab techs, the work that they do. And so the hospitals throughout the state have really appreciated Medicaid expansion because it's allowed access for many of their community members, but also has helped kind of take them right under the red line of profitability or being able to make the budget work to just a hair over to be in the black, especially our critical access hospitals throughout the state. The governor's proposal, which is supported by the Department of Human Services, is to take Medicaid expansion and make the reimbursable rates the same as just standard Medicaid, which is a significantly reduced payment to providers, so to doctors and nurse practitioners and the clinics and whatnot for that care. And so obviously the providers aren't caring for that, but the governor wants to do it, and their proposal is that then they can take that $16 million we set aside and put that towards behavioral health or some preventative work. Many of us legislators are pushing back that, when it comes to roads and bridges, we don't give up federal money for the state match. So why are we doing it for healthcare? And in the grand scheme of things, well, $16 million to many of us sounds like a lot of money in the state budget, which is $4.9 billion of just the general fund. $16 million is not a lot of money for us to insure thousands of North Dakotans. So the big fight is really between the hospitals and the governor's office. And part of that is they're just looking at sustainability. So we as a state have to get more serious about conversations about healthy lifestyles and preventative care and wellness. And that's tough because that's about, it's also individual responsibility, and we all make personal decisions around our healthcare. So the role of the state in that versus our communities and our workplaces, and then of course our individual responsibility. But healthcare continues to increase. The costs are significant in North Dakota. We as a population, I can speak for myself included, are not as healthy as we can be. Carla's doing some work on type 1 diabetes support. We know that a lot of us throughout the state have heart issues and respiratory issues for a variety of reasons. So that's one of the ways we can bring down costs and save the taxpayers' money and people's pocketbooks money. And I guess Brad Gibbons is on too. He may have some comments besides Ev. Ev, it looks like you went off.
Yes, thank you so much for having this event. We appreciate it. I'm Evelyn Quigley. And Josh, you did an excellent job in describing the benefits that there are from having this expansion. And from a national perspective, those states that have this endorsed have better healthcare outcomes. So I think along with the funding, we also need to constantly look, does this make a difference? And from what I have researched, it does make a significant difference when there is this expansion. So whatever you can do to continue, and I think along with it, then look at what are the outcomes? How are we benefiting the state in this so that we can better continue to advocate for this? Thank you.
And I'll chime in a little bit too, Josh. Thank you. And again, really, as a person from Grand Forks, thank you for letting me interlope in your discussion in Fargo. But these are statewide matters. The Medicaid expansion, I think sometimes people think, well, that impacts people in cities. But in North Dakota, when we looked at the numbers, almost 6 out of 10 people who receive Medicaid expansion actually live in rural North Dakota. So it's a big deal out there for people to be able to have access to healthcare. And that's the main reason why it's important. As part of that too, sometimes it's, well, why should I care about what happens to a rural hospital? But try to understand, particularly in a rural area, the rural hospital typically owns the primary care clinic. We have 36 critical access hospitals. 34 of them own the clinic. They own long-term care. They own some of the ambulances. So if you lose a rural hospital in North Dakota, you are losing access to care. And that's why the viability of rural hospitals is important. We saw, and I wrote this in my comments, that prior to Medicaid expansion, only 8 of our 36 critical access hospitals actually had positive operating margins. In other words, their revenues exceeded their expenses. And with Medicaid expansion and another esoteric part of the ACA, the drug discount bill part of it, now we're up to about half, which means North Dakota rural hospitals are basically comparable to the rest of the country. Where only about half of rural hospitals have positive margins. So that's very important. The other part of it too is that in addition to wanting to adjust the rate, the Department of Human Services wants to operate the program. So they have better control of it and taking it away from Sanford Health Plan. I think the providers are very comfortable with how Sanford Health Plan has been operating the program. So that's a bone of contention too. We know that Medicaid expansion will be reauthorized for North Dakota. The issue is, what does it look like? And that's where the concern is. And the final comment, and I also have this in my note, is that since 2010 across the country, about 133 rural hospitals have closed. 70% of them were in states that did not have Medicaid expansion. North Dakota has not had a rural hospital close in many, many years. So we'd kind of like to keep that. And again, the final thing is, it's not to save the rural hospital, it's to protect access to care in rural North Dakota. So those are my comments, and I'll be happy to, try to help you with this going forward. So thank you for letting me interlope.
Thanks. And for everyone's context, if you don't know, Brad Gibbons is, in his professional life, director of the UND Center for Rural Health. And then Ev Quigley is a retired nursing executive with Merit Care and Sanford Health, and really well respected throughout the state in terms of delivery of care. So,
could I jump into this?
Michael, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you all for what you do. We're very appreciative of the access that we have to the legislative assembly and hearing committees, and we've certainly taken advantage of that. Also want to thank you guys for sending out newsletters and taking the time. You guys are marvelous in terms of getting us involved. One of the things that we've been watching closely, and I don't tie it into the medical costs, are the prescription drug issue. And we spent a lot of time testifying the other day and with the Senate Human Services Committee. And there's a Senator Anderson on that committee who submitted bills, 2 of them for reimportation from Canada, and another one that would have us adopt their prices if we can't reimport drugs. And it was interesting. I found it really interesting to watch Big Pharma come in with their guns. It almost reminded me of watching C-SPAN on the federal level and try to interrogate pharmaceutical executives. But they came in and did their number big time. Somehow also got the Pharmaceutical Association from Canada to basically say, we're not interested in continuing to sell drugs in North Dakota, which would kill 2 of those bills very easily, because if the Canadian government cuts us off, that's a problem. But anyway, this is going to be a big deal, and you're going to be having to deal with that issue. And I don't know, it's tough, because that Big Pharma is tough, strong, perfect example of a corporation that has a lot of muscle. The other thing that I agree with on Carla too, we watched a number of people testify on changing the election laws, and there's a lot of people looking for problems that we don't have. And obviously trying to adopt a whole bunch of things nationally from all the rumors that occurred and everything else like that. So that's also a real big issue. And then the other thing we found intriguing, and you probably are all involved in this, are the number of attempts to beat up on the executive department, particularly on the governor, in terms of contributing for legislative races. That gets to be a popular issue in some places too. Anyway, I just wanted to toss some of those things out in case you're unaware of those things or want to be exposed to some of those things. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I'm gonna transition to another question from our chat. And Meryl, this one is for you, or at least you can start us off. Can you speak to the bill that's been proposed about creating a Clean Sustainable Energy Council and Fund? I'll say so-called. And can you speak a little bit about how there's disproportionate representation on this proposed group for the fossil fuel interests?
Yeah, thanks, Carla. I did see that question in the chat box there, and it's a bill that is over in the House, and I don't know if you two have been keeping track of it. I know of it, but we have our own set of energy bills, of course, in the Senate. Some of which will be coming to the floor soon as well. But it is somewhat, really, I think, no matter how you look at it, it's kind of redefining what clean and sustainable energy means, or it's kind of combining the traditional definition of clean energy or renewable energy with sustainable energy. And what it is doing is putting carbon capture that is associated with the lignite coal industry. If a project like Project Tundra were to go through and was able to successfully capture carbon while still burning coal, it would qualify as clean and renewable and sustainable. And the proposal is for, that's kind of iffy when you get to the solar and wind people. They're gaining strength in representation and getting a stronger voice as the years go by as well. And then if this proposal as it is now were to go through, there would be, I believe, a 15-member panel, 7 voting members, 6 of which would come from the fossil fuel industry. So, it seems to be somewhat unbalanced at the time, but I know the proposal is going forward. So yeah, it's something to watch. And not only just watch, but to be active in those discussions. And of course, if it does move out of the House into the Senate, we'll be there, part in that discussion. In the meantime, we can talk with our colleagues in the House and try to get a better feel for it. So, Josh, have you, being in the House Minority Leadership, I know you're aware of the bill as well. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you framed it well. I think it just had a hearing last week. I haven't watched that hearing yet, but certainly there's a lot of concern folks have that it's being called a Sustainable Renewable Energy Advisory Board, and there's very little input from renewable energy. And I don't think it's about picking winners or losers in that view. I think it's what we need to get, this is my opinion, we need to make sure we protect those communities in central North Dakota that, those are families and good jobs and North Dakotans that we want to keep their jobs going. We also know we can't turn off coal tomorrow. Our iPhones won't work anymore. We won't be able to Zoom anymore. So looking at more of how do we develop a bridge and look forward to allowing more renewable development throughout the state as part of that. Our biggest challenge is North Dakota, just like anything else when it's agriculture. Unfortunately, our students and others, we export more than we use in state. And that's no different than energy. And when we sell to a market, the market's shifting. And that's the reality we're dealing with. And, I hope we aren't, as a state, going to make a poor investment in an industry, a current industry in which private equity is not infusing because they don't see it as a good investment. I think we need to develop a bridge and work with those communities and figure out, if it's natural gas cycling at those plants, so it's more renewable. A lot of those coal plants have already put on significant scrubbers and made significant investments to try to burn cleaner. So there's less pollutants going into the air and the atmosphere. But, I think we just have to have more of a serious conversation, less about digging our heels in one side or the other side, and more about what does looking forward mean, and how do we do that responsibly?
I'm going to add a little bit to that, Josh, as well. Again, now Ford Motor Company, General Motors is talking about automobile manufacturers and farm equipment manufacturers have all pledged to be green that is renewable energy fueled by, in 15, 20 years. And that's pretty aggressive, but those are their goals. And companies like Amazon and Google, huge tech companies, they're all pledging to go green. And this carbon capture, when it comes to coal, for example, it's still experimental. That's what you mentioned, Josh. My concern is, and this is not everybody's viewpoint, I understand that. My concern, and as a member of the Energy Committee, is that it is experimental. And are we pumping? The latest request will be for $50 million, literally pumping $50 million into this so we can pump the CO2 into the ground, into salt caverns. are we trying to cling to something in the past that we still have to convince the customer that this is what you want? Or do we punt? What would happen if we pump $50 million into research, into the ERC, into renewables and battery storage and new advancements as far as that goes? I'm just afraid we'll be stuck in the past if we don't look to the future and start investing in that. And again, it's a personal view, and I'm outnumbered in that view on our energy committee, but it definitely has to be a discussion, I think. But my primary concern, like Josh mentioned, is the people who work in those towns, who work in Beulah and at the mines and at the energy plant. And we don't want to leave. No one wants to be any of those.
Well, we have a few questions that we didn't quite get to in the chat. I think we can answer them pretty quickly. One question from James: how viable do you think the school lunch bill is? The fiscal note associated with that was nearly $90 million. So it will be in my opinion, a heavy lift. You know, it's a big fiscal note. Josh, do you have any quick comments on that one?
Just that the bill sponsor, Representative Lori Beth Hager, made a comment this week that I think, if nothing else, there's potential some movement of, unfortunately not fully funding, but maybe is there more of a stipend that can go to schools to help offset costs? And it's, part of the magic dance with it is, again, we don't want to give up a lot of the federal money that comes to help fund those meals. So we have to work with food nutrition staff at DPI and at school district level to make that work. But she's hopeful that some sort of increased support is viable at this point, based on the conversation she's had with committee members.
Awesome. Another quick question with an answer. As a follow-up to our conversation about the redistricting process, one of the questions in our chat was, does the special session that's called later on in 2021 to finalize redistricting, does that count against our constitutional limit of 80 legislative days? And the answer is no, the governor calls us in, so that's separate. And then one last question from Marty: how is the state planning for the future reduction of oil income? Josh, you're kind of in the budget questions. Do you want to talk about a little bit about our diversification of our economy?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and we have to seriously look at, how do we get some different revenue streams in the state? And it's not just the energy income, but also there's been significant reduction of other tax and fee areas over the last 10 years, and so we're just feeling those impacts of those decisions. And so delivery of services may be impacted in a variety of ways if we don't find those new revenue streams. The discussions that are happening is, this bonding tool is one of the ways, especially for water projects, because we think of the FM diversion. Right now, we're allocating $66 million per biennium for like the next 6 bienniums, I believe it still is. One of the ideas that's actually in the GOP bill is, let's just pay $400 million right now. Use the bond, pay it, get that money out the door, get the diversion going. That saves the diversion money, it saves taxpayers money. It also then moves that big project, along with the Minot Flood project, out of the queue of the water projects, which are all funded from the Resources Trust Fund, which gets all its money from oil revenue. So that fund has been depleted or is smaller than what we've experienced because there's not as much oil revenue. So it impacts water projects. So the big projects have been taking up all the air or all the money, leaving smaller communities and smaller projects, especially rural water, in the regionalization projects that have been going. That doesn't necessarily, I don't think I answered the question. I just talked about the continued impacts, but there are some good ideas happening. I think Representative Mike Nathy out of Bismarck has this good idea of continuing to increase support for what's called the LIFT program. That is essentially some legacy fund money that goes toward, as a business grows and it matures, there's certain levels of investments where it's more risky, and we want to invest more in North Dakota businesses. So that there was $15 million last biennium. It proved huge. Any of you that are familiar with Bushel in North Fargo and their expansion of that program came out of that LIFT money. And that, you know, I think they have 100 more employees. They've got other capital investments that have come in and growing as a North Dakota company with a national reach. So trying to look at some of those ways to support entrepreneurship throughout the state.
And just to build on that point too, there are, if you remember 2 years ago, there was a proposal that I co-sponsored related to creating a higher education research fund. So that's a little bit longer term view on how we could create opportunities to better diversify our economy and reduce our reliance on oil, which obviously creates a very volatile revenue situation for our state. So we're hopeful that we might be able to move forward with a research proposal again this year. It's, you know, kind of tucked in a different bill rather than a standalone bill this year. So we're keeping our eye on that as well. We're also monitoring some of the bills that I'd call them from more the extreme right faction, which are meant to reduce our revenue. So there's a whole variety of bills about, you know, eliminating property tax or making our income tax a flat rate, or reducing certain laws. Like I'll use an example of a bill that got attention this week about not requiring adults to wear a seat belt. Well, that impacts our federal funding for, you know, like the federal safety and highway dollars that we get as a state. So even things related to policy can impact the funding that we get as a state as well. So we're trying to monitor all of those different things that could affect our revenue that we would traditionally get, as well as finding new ways of getting revenue. Another quick question, and then I think we'll wrap up. What is our opinion about the numerous mask and vaccine bills? I don't think that they'll have a good chance of passing the House. I think most of them are in the House, and I think a lot of them are getting do not pass recommendations out of the Human Services Committee related to the vaccine, the anti-vaccine bills. And I think the mask bill, didn't we vote on a mask bill the other day? I think we might have defeated that one.
That was the one that limited businesses' ability to require their employees, as well as any of the guests that come in for making their own decisions.
That got defeated. So hopefully the extreme bills that we're seeing will die a quick death. All right, well, you guys, thank you for participating in our experimental virtual forum. We are going to do this every month, the last Saturday of the month. You do have to register for each one separately because it's a unique link that you'll get. So if you're able to attend the one in late February, please go to Team North Fargo /forums to register for that one, and then you'll get a link for that as well. And then we'll post the recording of this. Hopefully the technology works for that. So you can share it if you know someone who wasn't able to attend.
Thank you to Carla for setting up the technical end of it. And Josh, our condolences to you and your family on your grandmother's passing. And thank you to everybody for attending. You know, it's a tremendous turnout. It's a great opportunity. And you know how to get a hold of any one of us. I appreciate the phone calls myself. I know the texting and the Facebook messaging has its place, of course, but don't be afraid to call as well. I think there's value in phone calls. Thanks so much for attending, and I'm moving on to my little community commitment here today. So thanks, folks.
All right, bye everyone. Have a great Saturday.